Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 2.5, which is in our second unit of our IB History 1 curriculum, and this is our Authoritarian Leaders unit, and we are going to discuss Hitler's Consolidation of Power Part 3 in lesson 2.5. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to do the following items. You should be able to describe the aims of Hitler's foreign policy in the early to mid-1930s. You should also be able to explain Hitler's early foreign policy regarding rejecting the Treaty of Versailles. And then lastly, explaining Hitler's foreign policy regarding Germany's neighbors and support for other European authoritarian regimes. So one of the things about foreign policy and consolidation of power is that Adolf Hitler is going to be able to use his foreign policy as an avenue, if you will, to help consolidate his consolidate his control over Germany. And so, in order for us to recognize that, or even be able to understand this idea of foreign policy, we need to look at the aims of foreign policy first of all. So, the broad aims of Germany's early foreign policy under Adolf Hitler were part of the Nazi Party platform, and this included uniting all German-speaking people into one nation. So, the first thing Adolf Hitler wanted to do was put all Germans under one roof. Secondly, he wanted a complete revocation of the Treaty of Versailles. What that means is that he wanted the Treaty of Versailles to be completely null and void, to be scratched out. And lastly, he wanted the idea of the pursuit of Lebensraum, which is that whole idea of living space. And so if you look at this graphic here, all the green here, this is parts of the region that the Germans were looking at as living space, where they were going to move, these Norwegians, the Swedes, all these Russians, Poles, Austrians, Czechs, all of that, move all those people out to make greater area for the Germans to live. And secondly, Hitler's early foreign policy will focus primarily on dismantling of Treaty of Versailles. Remember the Nazi Party platform? They said they wanted to disband the Treaty of Versailles. They wanted to get rid of it. And so his early foreign policy aims were all about doing just that, getting rid of the Treaty of Versailles. However, once we get to the mid-1930s, Hitler's going to support other authoritarian regimes in Europe. The biggest one we're going to talk about is his support for Franco in Spain. And so he's also going to focus on supporting Mussolini in Italy. And so Adolf Hitler is going to provide support for both of these. And so it's kind of like Hitler is spreading out and branching out at this point by giving aid to other authoritarian leaders within Europe, which is going to consolidate his power and make people look at him as a major global leader. So jumping into foreign policy, let's take a look at the earliest forms of foreign policy from 1933 to 1936. So World War II has not started yet in this time period, okay? So we're just talking about the time period just beforehand. So Hitler's early successes in foreign policy does increase his popularity, okay? Because remember, now we're in the 1930s, the Great Depression has happened, so Germany's economically, downtrodden and everything like that. Hitler has now come to power. He is now the chancellor. He's made himself the Führer. So he's merged those two offices together, all of that. So some of his early successes include he withdrew Germany from the League of Nations. Since the League of Nations was founded at the end of World War I, and it had not really done anything to help Germany throughout the 1920s, Hitler withdrew. The Saarland was returned to Germany after a plebiscite. The Saarland, if you notice, is right here. It's that little speck of black right there. It's a tiny little plot of land between Germany and France, and it's actually German territory. But it was created as a buffer zone, if you will, between between Germany and France at the end of World War I. And so they had a plebiscite, which is a public vote within that region, and as a result of that vote, the people in Saarland voted to return to Germany, so that German territory was now returned back to Germany. So that's a plus for Adolf Hitler, as well as the withdrawal of the League of Nations. He also violated the Treaty of Versailles by enlarging the army and then mandating conscription. What conscription is, that's the draft. Okay, so that means that he instituted a draft within Germany, so now Germany can increase the size of its military, which is direct contradiction to the Treaty of Versailles. And last but certainly not least, Adolf Hitler moved German troops into the Rhineland. So if you see this little light kind of mustard color that I just outlined for you in red, that was the Rhineland. And so that Rhineland was demilitarized. So all of Germany's military was pulled out at the end of World War I there to make Belgium and France feel a little bit more safe. And so Germany, under Adolf Hitler, he just moved his troops back into there. So it's it's no different than if President Biden moved troops into Texas. That's our territory, that he can certainly do that. That's not an issue. But that's what Adolf Hitler did, which was against the Treaty of Versailles. And so there was a lack of British and French rejection to all of these aggressions. So nobody said anything, nobody did anything. So Adolf Hitler considered that was a check plus to continue moving forward. And so that's what he did. When no one said no, he continued going. So now we go to the second part of his foreign policy, and this is moving us closer to war. So this is 1936 to 39. 1939 is the big year when everything really explodes and World War II starts. But let's talk about the very years right prior to that. So Hitler uses both foreign policy to expand his influence in both Germany and abroad. So Hitler is making himself a positive picture, or painting himself a positive picture of himself in Germany, as well as throughout the world, because even though he's violating some things of the Treaty of Versailles, the world is taking a blind eye to it. And many people are looking at him as a dynamic and charismatic leader, which nobody denies that. He is a great orator, he's a great speech maker, all of that. So people are automatically drawn to Hitler because of that. So some of the things that Adolf Hitler does is he's going to send troops to support Francisco Franco in the Spanish Civil War. So troops are going to be sent down into Spain. He also signed the Anti-Comintern Treaty. And this Anti-Comintern Treaty was signed between Germany and the Axis powers, which was Germany, Italy, and Japan. So he actually signed this Anti-Comintern Treaty with Mussolini and Tojo for the two other Axis powers. And by doing that, they created the Axis powers. Now, of course, all this is going to happen in 1936 and 37. He gets a little bit more aggressive once we get closer to World War II in 1938 and 1939. So in March of 1938, Germany's borders consisted of exactly as they would be here, that you will see in green, that I'm outlining for you. This is all Germany's borders in 1938. Now, in March of 1938, the German army is going to spill across the border into, let me make a different color here, into Austria. And as a result, they're going to take Austria through a concept called the Anschluss. So that's why Austria here is painted orange, because Austria is now going to belong to Germany. In September of 1938, so 6 months later, he's going to go after the Sudetenland. And the Sudetenland is this little tiny orange strip that you see right around Czechoslovakia. All of that was part of the Sudetenland. So this little part that's like in black here, that was the Sudetenland. Germany took that as well. Well, Czechoslovakia, this happened at the Munich conference, by the way. This happened at the Munich conference where Britain and France basically told Hitler he could keep the Sudetenland, and the reason being is because Hitler took that because there were Germans living in this black area. And so as a result, he said he wanted to unite all Germans under one leadership. That was part of the Nazi program, and he has now achieved that. He's united Austrian Germans, all of the Germans here, and he's got the Sudetenland Germans there as well. So in 1939, Hitler demands that old German lands be brought back to him, back to Germany. So if you look here, this is that Polish corridor that we talked about a couple of days ago, that little outlet to the sea. That used to be German territory. Hitler now demands it in September of 1939. Poland refuses. But he doesn't attack Poland yet. On the other side of Poland is the Soviet Union. Hitler realizes that if he attacks Poland, the Soviet Union may get antsy and may attack him back. So he's going to sign the Nazi-Soviet pact with the Soviet Union. And what that does is that if Hitler invades Poland, the Soviet Union says they will not come to Poland's rescue. They will not invade Germany on their behalf. But a secret agreement will actually be signed between Germany and the Soviet Union where they will split Poland in half. And we'll see about that later. All right, everyone, so that is the end of Lesson 2.5, Hitler's Consolidation of Power, Part 3. So can you describe the aims of Hitler's foreign policy from the early to mid-1930s? Can you explain Hitler's early foreign policy regarding rejection of the Treaty of Versailles? And can you explain Hitler's foreign policy regarding Germany's neighbors and his support for other European authoritarian regimes? If you can, pat yourself on the back. You're doing an amazing job. At this point, Lesson 2.5 is over. Please look to see if there's any activity attached to that. If so, complete it, and then move on to Lesson 2.6. Thanks so much for your time, and have a wonderful day.